They were measuring her hips again. Maribel Crow stood motionless on the raised platform at Blackridge Crossing, snow collecting on her shoulders while a man with ink-stained fingers traced numbers onto parchment. He didn't look at her face. No one did. They catalogued her body the way merchants appraised cattle, weight, proportion, breeding potential, and wrote their conclusions in silence. The wind cut through her wool dress. She wanted to pull the shawl tighter, but movement felt like permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to be dismissed faster. Around her the station hummed with transaction. Mail order contracts changed hands. Alphas collected their omegas with handshakes and signed receipts. Some women smiled. Others cried. Maribel did neither. She had learned that hope was dangerous in places built on judgment. The clerk finished his assessment and stepped back without meeting her eyes. "Next," he called. Barrow Kincaid climbed the platform like a man who owned the timber beneath his boots. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of alpha whose presence bent rooms around him. His coat was expensive, his boots polished despite the mud and slush. He smelled like pine smoke and old money. He circled her once. Maribel's stomach twisted, but she kept her breathing even. She had survived this before. She would survive it again. Kincaid stopped in front of her, tilting his head as if solving a problem he hadn't anticipated. His gaze dragged over her curves, lingering too long on her waist, her thighs, the softness she had been told her entire life was unacceptable. "This is the Omega from the Eastern Registry?" His voice carried across the platform. People turned to watch. The handler nodded, shuffling papers. "Maribel Crow, 28 years old, registered Omega, clean health record. I ordered someone fit to bear heirs." Kincaid's tone didn't rise, but the words landed like stones. "Not someone past her prime." Heat crawled up Maribel's neck. Not anger, shame, the kind that lived under the skin and never fully left. The handler hesitated. "Sir, the contract specifies—" "I don't care what the contract says." Kincaid turned his back on her, addressing the crowd now instead of the clerk. "Look at her. Too heavy. Too old. Barren, most likely. What pack would waste resources on damaged goods?" Damaged goods. Maribel's hands trembled inside the shawl. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. No one spoke. Kincaid descended the platform without another glance, his rejection louder than any insult. Whispers rippled through the station. Some laughed, others shook their heads in pity. A few women looked away, relieved it wasn't them. The handler cleared his throat. "There are other interested parties." Maribel barely heard him. Her vision had narrowed to the snow falling in slow, patient sheets. She focused on counting flakes. 1, 2, 3. Anything to stop the burning behind her eyes. Another alpha climbed the platform, then another. Each one circled her, each one found reasons to refuse. Too soft, too quiet, too much baggage in her scent, whatever that meant. They spoke about her like she wasn't standing 3 feet away, breathing the same cold air. By the 4th rejection, Maribel stopped counting snowflakes. By the 5th, she stopped caring. The handler looked exhausted, or maybe embarrassed. It was hard to tell. He flipped through his ledger, ink smudging under his thumb. "There's one more," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "The Rookridge brothers." Maribel had heard the name before. Everyone had. Triplet alphas who built railways through territories other packs feared to touch. Reclusive, wealthy, dangerous in ways people whispered about but never explained. "They didn't specify preferences," the handler continued, though his tone suggested that wasn't necessarily a kindness. Maribel didn't respond. What was there to say? The station had quieted. Even the other Omegas stopped, talking, their eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the tracks. Maribel followed their gaze. 3 men emerged from the snow. They didn't walk like the others. No swagger, no performance. They moved with the kind of stillness that made the world rearrange itself around them. Identical faces, identical height. But their energy crackled differently. One watchful, one sharp, one impossibly calm. Calder reached the platform first. He was broad-shouldered, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes the gray of winter storms. He studied Maribel the way someone might study a map, carefully, without cruelty. Bram followed, sharper in every way. His gaze moved over the crowd like he was cataloging threats before they materialized. When his eyes landed on Maribel, something shifted in his expression. Not disgust, not pity, curiosity. Isambard came last, quieter than his brothers. He didn't circle her. He simply looked at her face, then at her hands folded tight against her stomach, then back to her face. "You're freezing," Calder said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Maribel blinked. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her instead of about her. Before she could answer, Calder removed his coat, heavy wool lined with fur. He draped it over her shoulders with the same care someone might use handling glass. Maribel's breath caught. The coat smelled like cedar and smoke and something wilder she couldn't name. Warmth sank into her skin, but the gesture unsettled her more than any rejection had. Kindness felt like a trap. Bram's gaze flicked to the handler. "She's coming with us." The handler stammered. "There's paperwork. We'll handle it." Isambard's voice was quieter than his brother's, but it carried the same weight. Final. Unmovable. The crowd murmured. Someone gasped. Maribel stood frozen on the platform, Calder's coat heavy on her shoulders, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Kincaid stepped forward from the dispersing crowd, his face tight with something that looked like warning. "You sure about this, Rookridge? She's been evaluated. You know what the records say." Calder didn't turn. "We don't make decisions based on someone else's opinion." Bram's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Or their cruelty." Kincaid opened his mouth, then thought better of it. He walked away. Maribel's pulse hammered in her throat. She looked between the three brothers, alphas who had just claimed her without asking a single question about her body, her history, or her worth. "Can you walk?" Isambard asked gently. She nodded, though her legs felt distant. "Then let's go home." Home. The word sounded foreign, impossible. But as the brothers turned toward the tree line, Maribel followed, one shaking step after another, still wrapped in Calder's coat, still wondering if kindness could be trusted, or if it was simply another kind of judgment she hadn't learned to recognize yet. Her legs moved, but Maribel didn't feel the ground beneath her. Boots. The platform fell away behind them, the whispers, the stares, the weight of judgment she'd carried since stepping off the train. Now there was only snow and silence, and the three alphas walking ahead of her like they'd done this before. Like claiming an omega no one else wanted was ordinary. Calder's coat still hung on her shoulders, too large, smelling of cedar and something deeper she couldn't place. It should have comforted her. Instead, it made her chest tighten. Kindness always came with conditions. She just didn't know theirs yet. The brothers led her past the station, past the iron tracks cutting through frozen earth, toward a line of evergreens that swallowed the horizon. No wagon, no horses, just snow crunching under boots and breath misting in the air. Maribel's fingers trembled inside the borrowed coat. She wanted to ask where they were going, how far, why they'd chosen her. But the questions felt too fragile to speak aloud, like they might shatter whatever strange mercy had just saved her from another night alone in the cold. Bram glanced back over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Not cruel, but not soft either. "You all right?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm fine," she lied. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "You're shaking." "Because I don't understand what's happening. Because no one's been kind without wanting something. Because I don't know if you're saving me or claiming me or—" "I'm cold," she said instead. Isambard slowed his pace until he was walking beside her. He didn't look at her directly, just matched her steps through the snow. Quiet. Patient. Like he knew she needed space, but didn't want her to feel alone. It was worse than Bram's sharpness, worse than Calder's silent authority. This kind of gentleness felt dangerous because it made her want to believe it. They walked in silence for what felt like miles. The station disappeared behind them, swallowed by trees and falling snow. Maribel's lungs burned from the cold, but she didn't ask them to stop. Stopping meant questions. Questions meant answers she wasn't ready to hear. Finally, Calder spoke without turning around. "We don't live near town." "I noticed," Maribel said quietly. "Most Omegas find that difficult." She almost laughed. Difficult, as if being far from people who despised her was a hardship. "I'll manage," she said. Bram glanced at her again, something flickering in his expression. Approval, maybe, or curiosity. She couldn't tell. The trees began to thin. Ahead, through the snow, Maribel saw the outline of a lodge, massive, timber-built, smoke rising from 2 stone chimneys. It looked like something carved out of the wilderness itself, sturdy and unyielding. She stopped walking. The brothers noticed immediately. All 3 turned, their attention locking on her in unison. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in years. "What's wrong?" Isambard asked. Maribel's throat tightened. She didn't know how to answer. What was she supposed to say? That she didn't trust this? That every kindness she'd ever been shown had eventually been used against her? That she was terrified of what they'd expect from her once they got her inside? "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" The words hung in the cold air between them. Calder stepped closer. Not threatening. Just present. His gaze held hers, steady and unreadable. "Because everyone else was looking at you wrong," he said simply. Maribel's breath caught. Bram crossed his arms, his tone matter of fact. "You're not what they wanted. That doesn't mean you're not what someone needs." "We're not expecting anything," Isambard added quietly. "You'll have your own space, your own choices. No one's going to hurt you here." Maribel wanted to believe them. She wanted it so badly it ached. But belief was a luxury she'd lost years ago, stripped away one rejection at a time until all that remained was survival. "Okay," she said. Because what else could she say? Calder nodded once, then turned back toward the lodge. The others followed. Maribel stood there for another breath, still wrapped in Calder's coat, still trembling despite the warmth. Then she forced her feet to move. The lodge loomed closer with every step. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and through the frosted windows she could see the flicker of firelight. It looked warm, safe. She didn't trust it. But she followed them inside anyway. The door swung open, and heat rushed out to meet her. Wood smoke and something cooking, the scent of pine and leather and home. Maribel's chest tightened again, this time for a different reason. She couldn't remember the last time anywhere had smelled like home. Inside, the lodge was exactly what she'd expected. Wide timber beams overhead, a stone hearth crackling with fire, rugs layered over worn wooden floors. Simple, strong, built to last through winters that would break lesser structures. The brothers moved through the space with practiced ease. Calder hung his hat by the door. Bram disappeared into a side room without a word. Isambard lingered near the fire, his gaze drifting toward Maribel like he was waiting to see if she'd bolt. She didn't. Instead, she stood just inside the doorway, still wearing Calder's coat, still shaking despite the warmth seeping into her skin. "You can sit," Calder said, gesturing toward the chairs near the fire. "Or take the coat off, whichever you prefer." Maribel's fingers curled into the fabric. She didn't want to take it off. It felt like armor, like the only thing keeping her from falling apart, but she forced herself to shrug it from her shoulders and hold it out to him. Calder took it without comment, draping it over a hook near the door. When he turned back, his expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still steady, still impossible to read. "There's stew if you're hungry," he said. Maribel nodded, though her stomach was too tight to think about food. Isambard gestured toward the fire. "Come warm up first." She crossed the room slowly, feeling their eyes on her, not invasive, but present, watching to see if she'd break. Or maybe watching to see if she'd stay. The heat from the hearth sank into her bones, and for the first time since stepping off the train, Maribel felt her body begin to relax. Then the scent hit her. Faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the smoke and pine and warmth, but it grew stronger with every breath she took, cedar and rain, and something wild, something that made her pulse stutter and her skin prickle with awareness. It was coming from them, all three of them. Maribel's breath caught, her instincts screamed at her to move, to step back, to run, but her body refused. Instead, she stood frozen by the fire, her heart pounding so loud she was certain they could hear it. Calder's gaze sharpened. "You feel it." It wasn't a question. Maribel's hands trembled. "I don't—" "You do." Bram's voice came from the doorway behind her, low and certain. "Your scent just changed." Her scent. Maribel hadn't had a scent in years. The medicines she'd been given since childhood made sure of that. Suppressants, corrections, treatments designed to fix what the doctors called broken. But now she could smell them, and they could smell her. And something inside her that had been dormant for so long it felt dead was waking up. "What's happening?" she whispered. Isambard stepped closer, his voice steady. "You're not broken, Maribel. You never were." The words should have been a comfort. Instead, they terrified her. Maribel took a step back. The movement was instinctive, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Away from the fire, away from them, away from whatever was unraveling inside her chest. "I need air," she said, though the words came out wrong. Too tight, too breathless. Isambard's hand lifted slightly, palm open, not reaching for her. Just steady. "You're safe." Safe. The word felt foreign. Maribel pressed her back against the timber wall, her fingers splaying against the rough wood. The scent still clung to her, cedar and rain and something primal that made her skin hum with recognition. She shouldn't be able to smell them this clearly. She shouldn't be able to smell anything. "This isn't possible," she whispered. Calder moved closer, but not too close. He kept his distance, his expression unreadable. "How long have you been on suppressants?" Maribel's throat closed. "Since I was 12. "Who prescribed them?" "The doctors, the registry, everyone." Her voice cracked. "They said I needed them, that without them I'd be—" She stopped herself, hating how small she sounded. "Unmanageable?" Bram's tone was sharp, but not aimed at her. "Difficult? Defective?" Maribel flinched. Those were the exact words they'd used. Calder's jaw tightened. "You were never defective." "You don't know that." The words came out harsher than she intended. "You don't know me. You don't know what's wrong with me." "Nothing's wrong with you." Isambard's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "Your body's been suppressed for 16 years. Now it's waking up." Maribel shook her head, her pulse racing. "No, it doesn't work like that. Once an Omega's broken, she doesn't just—" "You're not broken." Calder stepped closer, and this time Maribel couldn't make herself move. His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "They lied to you." Her breath hitched. "Why would they?" "Because scared Omegas are easier to control." Bram's voice was cold now, edged with something dangerous. "Easier to sell. Easier to discard when you don't fit their perfect mold." Maribel's hands curled into fists against the wall. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell them they were wrong, that the doctors knew better, that she'd been examined and evaluated and labeled for good reason. But the sense surrounding her said otherwise, her body said otherwise, and the truth was a weight she wasn't ready to carry. "I can't do this," she whispered. Isambard tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely at the room, at them, at herself. "Whatever you think is happening, I don't—" Her voice broke. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go, not because I wanted this." "We know," Calder said simply. Maribel blinked. "Then why—" "Because you deserve better than what they gave you." His voice softened, just enough to make her chest ache. "And we're not them." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability had only ever gotten her hurt. "I need to be alone," she said. The brothers exchanged a glance, quick, wordless, some silent conversation she wasn't part of. Then Calder nodded. "There's a room upstairs, end of the hall. It's yours." Maribel hesitated. "Mine?" "Yours," Isambard confirmed. "Door locks from the inside. No one goes in without permission." The fact that he felt the need to say it made her stomach twist. "Okay," she whispered. She pushed off the wall and crossed the room on unsteady legs. The brothers didn't move, didn't follow. They just watched her go. 3 sets of eyes tracking her movements, but none of them stopping her. Maribel climbed the stairs without looking back. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit by a single oil lamp hanging from a beam. 3 doors lined the walls, 2 closed, one at the end standing slightly ajar. She walked toward it, her heart pounding harder with every step. The room was small, simple, a bed with clean linens, a chair by the window, a wash basin on a wooden stand. Nothing ornate, nothing excessive, just space. Hers. Maribel stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her fingers found the lock, a heavy iron bolt that slid into place with a satisfying click. Then, finally, she let herself breathe. Her legs gave out and she sank onto the edge of the bed, hands pressed against her knees to stop them from shaking. The scent still clung to her skin, faint but undeniable. Cedar, rain, wildness, them. She buried her face in her hands. What was happening to her? 16 years. 16 years of pills and injections and doctors telling her she was deficient, that her body didn't work the way it should, that she'd never be a real Omega, never attract a mate, never carry life. And now 3 alphas had walked through the snow, claimed her without question, and brought her to a place that smelled like home, and her body was responding. Her traitorous, broken, supposedly barren body was responding. Maribel's hands dropped to her lap. She stared at the floor, trying to make sense of the chaos unraveling inside her. She should leave. She should walk out of this lodge, back through the snow, back to the station, and take the next train anywhere else. Because whatever was starting here, whatever connection her body was trying to form, would only end in disappointment. It always did. But even as the thought formed, her fingers curled into the quilt beneath her. Soft, warm, real. And for the first time in years, she didn't want to run. Downstairs, she heard the low murmur of voices, the brothers talking amongst themselves. She couldn't make out the words, but the tones were careful, measured, like they were navigating something fragile. Maribel closed her eyes and tried to slow her breathing. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that everything had just changed, and she had no idea if she was strong enough to survive it. A soft knock broke the silence. Maribel's eyes snapped open. Her pulse jumped. "It's me!" Isambard's voice came through the door, quiet, non-threatening. "I brought food. I'll leave it outside if you don't want company." Maribel stared at the door. She should tell him to go. Should reinforce the boundary she'd just set. But her stomach twisted with hunger she'd been ignoring since the train, and the thought of sitting alone in this room while the scent of stew drifted under the door felt unbearable. Her hand moved before she could stop it. The lock slid open. Isambard stood in the hallway, holding a tray with a bowl of stew, bread, and a cup of water. He didn't step forward, didn't push, just waited. "You didn't have to," Maribel said. "I know." She took the tray carefully, their fingers not quite touching. The warmth of the bowl seeped into her palms. "Thank you," she whispered. Isambard nodded once. Then he turned and walked back down the hall without another word. Maribel stood there for a moment longer, holding the tray, watching him disappear down the stairs. Then she stepped back inside, closed the door and locked it again. But this time, when she sat on the edge of the bed, the trembling in her hands had eased, and the scent clinging to her skin didn't feel quite so terrifying, just unfamiliar, and maybe, just maybe, something she could learn to live with. Maribel set the tray on the small table beside the bed and stared at the steam rising from the bowl. Her stomach growled, but her hands refused to move. She'd spent so many years eating alone, in registry dormitories, on trains, in rented rooms where no one cared if she finished her meals or let them go cold, that the simple act of being fed felt like intimacy she hadn't earned. She picked up the spoon. The stew was rich, thick with vegetables and meat that fell apart under the slightest pressure. Warmth spread through her chest with the first bite, then the second. She ate slowly, methodically, forcing herself to taste it instead of simply swallowing to survive. It was good. Too good. The kind of food someone made when they cared about the person eating it. Maribel's throat tightened. She set the spoon down and pressed her palms against her knees, willing herself not to cry, and over something as simple as a bowl of stew. But the tears came anyway, silent, stubborn, sliding down her cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped them away roughly. Downstairs the voices had quieted. The lodge had settled into stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of timber and the wind pressing against the windows. Maribel finished eating in silence, then set the tray aside and moved to the window. Snow fell in thick curtains beyond the glass, turning the world into a blur of white. She could barely see the tree line, couldn't see the station, couldn't see anything beyond the lodge and the wilderness surrounding it, isolated, trapped. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. No one could find her here. No registry clerks, no doctors with their evaluations and corrections, no alphas circling her like she was livestock, just snow and silence, and 3 men downstairs who'd claimed her without asking what she was worth. Maribel rested, her forehead against the cold glass. She didn't know what to do with that. A sound broke through the quiet, sharp, sudden. A crash from somewhere below, followed by raised voices. Maribel's pulse spiked. She stepped back from the window, her body tensing instinctively. The voices grew louder, not shouting but close, tense. Controlled anger barely held in check. She moved to the door without thinking, her hand hovering over the lock. Stay inside, lock the door, ignore it. But her feet carried her forward anyway. She slid the bolt open and eased the door ajar, just enough to hear. "Not our problem." That was Bram, his tone sharp as broken glass. "It becomes our problem if they show up here." Calder's voice was lower, steady but edged with warning. "They won't." Isambard sounded certain. "Not yet. You don't know that. I know they're not stupid enough to come onto our land uninvited." Silence. Then Bram again, colder this time. "They came uninvited to the station. They circled her like she was nothing. You think they'll hesitate if the council tells them to retrieve her?" Maribel's breath caught. They were talking about her. "She's not going anywhere." Calder's voice carried a finality that made something in Maribel's chest tighten. "We claimed her. That's not negotiable." "The council won't see it that way," Bram said. "You know how they operate. She's registered, documented. If they decide she's council property..." "She's not property." Isambard's voice cut through, quiet but absolute. "And if they try to take her, they'll learn exactly why the 3 of us stay out here." Another silence, heavier this time. Maribel's hands trembled against the doorframe. "Council property." The words echoed in her skull, dragging up memories she'd tried to bury. Registry evaluations, inspections. Doctors who treated her body like it belonged to the state. She'd thought leaving the station meant leaving that behind, but nothing ever stayed behind. It always followed. Downstairs, something else crashed, a chair scraping hard against wood. Footsteps. Then Calder's voice again, quieter now, but strained. "She's awake." Maribel froze. How did he... "I can hear her breathing." Calder's voice drifted up the stairs, calm but undeniable. "Come down if you want, or stay up there. Either way, we're not having this conversation through walls." Maribel's heart hammered against her ribs. She could close the door, lock it again, pretend she hadn't heard, but they already knew. And pretending wouldn't change what they'd said. She stepped into the hallway. The stairs felt longer than before, each step creaking under her weight. By the time she reached the bottom, all three brothers were standing in the main room, their attention fixed on her. Calder stood near the hearth, arms crossed. Bram leaned against the far wall, his expression unreadable. Isambard was closest to the stairs, his gaze steady but not invasive. "You heard?" Calder said. Not a question. Maribel nodded. "Good." He didn't look apologetic. "Then you know what we're dealing with." Her throat felt dry. "The council wants me back." "They want control," Bram corrected. "There's a difference." Maribel's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then let them have it." The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Because it was true, wasn't it? She'd been controlled her entire life. Evaluated, corrected, sold. What difference did it make who held the leash? Calder's expression hardened. "No. You don't get to decide that." "Neither do they." Maribel's voice rose. "I'm not worth this. I'm not worth you fighting the council or risking your land or—" "Stop." Isambard's voice was quiet, but it cut through her spiral like a blade. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't get to decide your worth based on what they told you." "They're not wrong." Her voice cracked. "I'm broken. I'm barren. You're standing in our home because we chose you," Calder interrupted. "Not because we needed something from you. Because we saw you, and we're not giving that up because someone with a title thinks they know better." Maribel's breath shuddered. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell them they were making a mistake, that she wasn't worth the trouble, that they'd regret this, but the words wouldn't come. Because part of her, buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed, wanted to believe them, wanted to believe she was worth choosing. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Bram straightened from the wall. "Now we make sure they can't touch you." "How?" "By keeping you here." Calder's tone left no room for argument. "The council has authority in towns, at stations, in regulated territories. But this land, this is ours, and they don't have jurisdiction." Maribel's pulse stuttered. "You're saying I can't leave." "We're saying you're safer if you don't," Isambard corrected gently. "At least until we know what they're planning." Trapped. The word rose in her mind again, but this time it felt different. Not like confinement, like protection, and she hated that she couldn't tell the difference. "For how long?" she whispered. Calder met her gaze. "As long as it takes." Maribel stood there, surrounded by 3 alphas who'd claimed her without asking, in a lodge miles from anywhere, with snow falling thick enough to bury the world outside. She should have been terrified, but all she felt was the steady warmth of the fire at her back and the faint, undeniable scent of cedar and rain wrapping around her like a promise she didn't know how to trust. "Okay," she said finally. Because what other choice did she have? Calder nodded once. Bram's expression softened, just barely. Isambard stepped back, giving her space again. And Maribel stood there in the center of the room, no longer sure if she was a guest or a captive, or something else entirely. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Maribel's fingers twisted into the fabric of her skirt, searching for something to anchor herself. The fire crackled behind her, snow pressed against the windows, and 3 alphas watched her like they were waiting for her to shatter. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I need to sit," she said quietly. Isambard gestured toward the chairs near the hearth. Maribel crossed the room slowly, feeling their eyes track her movements. She sank into the nearest chair, the wood creaking under her weight, and stared at the flames. The brothers didn't move closer. They gave her space. Calder still by the hearth, Bram near the wall, Isambard lingering by the stairs, waiting. For what? She didn't know. "You said I'm waking up," Maribel said finally, her voice barely audible over the fire. "What does that mean?" Calder glanced at his brothers, some silent conversation passing between them. Then he looked back at her, Your omega traits were suppressed, chemically, for years. Now that you're off the medications, your body's trying to recalibrate. Recalibrate, Maribel repeated, tasting the word. It sounded clinical, detached, like her body was a machine instead of something that had been failing her since childhood. You'll start scenting again, Isambard added gently, feeling bonds, recognizing pack structures, things the suppressants dulled. Maribel's hands clenched in her lap. They told me I didn't have those things, that I was born deficient. They lied, Bram said bluntly. Her head snapped up. You don't know that? Yes, we do. Calder's voice was steady, infuriatingly calm. Omegas don't just stop producing scent. It doesn't work that way. Someone decided you needed to be controllable, and they made sure you were. Controllable. The word lodged in her chest like a splinter. Why? She whispered. Why would they do that? Because strong omegas are dangerous, Bram said. Not to packs, to systems, to men who profit off keeping people weak. Maribel shook her head, her throat tightening. I'm not strong. I've never been. You survived. Isambard's voice cut through her spiral, quiet but unyielding. 16 years of being told you were broken and you're still here, still standing. That's strength. Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. You don't understand. Then help us understand, Calder said. Maribel's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not pity, not judgment, just patience. Like he was willing to wait as long as it took for her to speak. And maybe that was why the words finally came. I was 12 when they started the treatments, she said quietly, staring at her hands. My mother took me to the registry clinic because I wasn't cycling like the other girls. They ran tests, took blood, measured everything. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. The doctor said I was deficient, that my body wasn't producing the hormones it needed, that without intervention I'd never attract a mate, never carry children, never be useful to a pack. She swallowed hard. So they fixed me. Fixed you? Bram echoed, his tone dark. Maribel nodded. Pills every morning, injections every month. They said it would regulate my system, make me viable. She laughed bitterly. It didn't work. I just got heavier, slower. My scent never came in, and the doctors kept saying it was my fault, that my body was resisting treatment. Calder's jaw tightened. It wasn't treatment. It was suppression. They told my mother I'd be a burden, Maribel continued, her voice breaking, that no pack would take me, that the kindest thing she could do was send me to the registry so they could find someone desperate enough to overlook my flaws. Isambard made a sound low in his throat, something between anger and grief. She believed them, Maribel whispered, and I believed them. Because what else was I supposed to do? They were doctors, officials, people who were supposed to know better. The fire crackled, snow hissed against the windows, and Maribel sat there, tears sliding down her cheeks despite her best efforts to stop them. I spent 16 years thinking I was broken, she said, thinking I deserved every rejection, every evaluation, every humiliation, and now you're telling me it was a lie? Yes, Calder said simply. Maribel's hands trembled. How am I supposed to believe that? You don't have to, Isambard said gently. Not yet, but your body will show you. It's already starting. She shook her head. What if you're wrong? What if I really am? You're not. Bram stepped forward, his expression fierce. And even if you were, it wouldn't change anything. You're here. You're ours. That's not conditional. Maribel stared at him, her breath hitching. You don't even know me. We know enough. You don't. Her voice rose, desperation bleeding through. You don't know what I've done, what I've let happen. You don't know how many times I stood there and let them measure me and catalog me and decide I wasn't worth keeping. I didn't fight. I didn't run. Her voice broke. I just let them. Calder crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. His gaze held hers, steady and unrelenting. You survived, he said quietly. That's not weakness. That's endurance. Maribel shook her head, tears falling faster now. It doesn't feel like endurance. It feels like cowardice. It's not. How do you know? Because you're still here, Isambard said from behind her. You could have given up, could have let the cold take you at the station, could have walked away when we brought you here, but you didn't. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Calder said, and you chose to keep breathing. That matters. Maribel's chest heaved. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell them they were wrong, that survival wasn't the same as strength, that enduring wasn't the same as fighting, but the words wouldn't come, because maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe she had been fighting all along, just not in ways anyone recognized. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Isambard asked gently. Trust you. Trust this. She gestured vaguely at the room, at them, at herself. I don't know how to believe I'm worth what you're offering. Calder's expression softened. Then don't. Not yet. Just stay. Let your body heal. Let yourself rest. The rest will come when it's ready. Maribel looked at him, at all three of them, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking. Thawing. Okay, she whispered. Calder nodded and stood, stepping back to give her space again. Bram returned to his place by the wall. Isambard moved toward the kitchen, his footsteps quiet against the wood, and Maribel sat there by the fire, her hands still trembling, her face still wet with tears, but her breathing finally starting to even out. She didn't trust them, not yet. But for the first time in 16 years, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could learn how. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The fire burned lower, and somewhere deep in the lodge, a door creaked open. Maribel's head lifted. Footsteps, heavy, unfamiliar. The brothers tensed immediately, their bodies shifting into alertness. Stay here, Calder said, his voice low and commanding. But Maribel was already standing, her heart pounding as the footsteps grew louder. Closer. And then a voice, cold, smooth, dripping with authority, echoed through the lodge. Rookridge, we need to talk. Maribel's breath stopped. The voice didn't belong here. Smooth, calculated, carrying the kind of authority that expected obedience. It sliced through the warmth of the lodge like winter itself had found a way inside. Calder moved first, positioning himself between Maribel and the doorway. Bram shifted to the left, his hand dropping to something at his belt. A knife, maybe, though Maribel couldn't see clearly. Isambard stayed near her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from his body. You're not welcome here, Vale, Calder said, his voice flat and dangerous. Vale. The name triggered something in Maribel's memory. Whispers at the station, fragments of conversations she'd overheard. Council official, enforcer, someone who made problems disappear. Footsteps approached from the entry hall, measured and unhurried. Then a man stepped into view. Tall, lean, dressed in dark wool that looked expensive even in firelight. His face was handsome in a way that felt manufactured, too symmetrical, too controlled. Everything about him radiated calculated charm, from his easy smile to the way he held his hands loosely at his sides, like he had nothing to fear, like he owned every room he entered. His gaze swept the lodge, taking in the brothers, the fire, the space itself. Then his eyes found Maribel. She felt the weight of that looked like a physical thing, assessing, cataloging, deciding. Miss Crow, he said warmly, as if they were old friends. I'm relieved to see you're safe. When we heard about the confusion at the station, we were quite concerned. Maribel's throat closed. She didn't answer. Vale's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. I'm Edric Vale. I oversee Omega placements for the Territorial Council. I apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced. These things happen when protocols aren't followed properly. She was claimed, Bram said coldly. Protocols were followed. Ah. Vale's tone remained pleasant. That's actually why I'm here. You see, Miss Crow's registry status is Complicated. There are medical records that require review before any permanent placement can be approved. She's not council property, Calder said. Of course not. Vale spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. She's a registered Omega under territorial protection, which means her well-being is our responsibility. Surely you understand. Maribel's hands curled into fists. Territorial protection. The same words they'd used when they'd taken her blood, measured her body, labeled her deficient. Protection always sounded kind until you realized it was just another word for control. I'm fine, she said quietly. Vale's attention snapped back to her, his expression softening with practiced sympathy. I'm sure you believe that, but given your medical history, the suppressants, the evaluations, we need to ensure your transition off medication is monitored properly, for your safety. She doesn't need monitoring, Isambard said, his voice steady. She needs to be left alone. Vale sighed, as if dealing with unreasonable children. Gentlemen, I admire your protective instincts. But Miss Crow's condition is delicate. Omega suppression for that length of time can cause complications during reactivation. Hormonal instability, aggression, in some cases, psychosis. Maribel flinched. She's not unstable, Calder said, his tone deadly quiet. Perhaps not yet. Vale's gaze returned to Maribel, piercing and unnervingly patient. But these things escalate quickly. I've seen it before. An Omega goes off suppressants, her body floods with unchecked hormones, and she becomes a danger to herself and others. That's not what's happening here, Bram snapped. You can't know that. Vale took a step closer, his voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial. Look, I understand the appeal. 3 alphas, 1 omega, it's a powerful dynamic. But this isn't about desire. This is about safety, hers and yours. Maribel's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't dangerous or unstable or any of the things he was implying. But what if he was right? What if her body was breaking down instead of waking up? What if the scent she'd started to feel, the pull toward the brothers, was just another malfunction in a system that had never worked properly? Miss Crow. Vale's voice softened, almost gentle. I know this is frightening, but you don't have to go through it alone. Come back with me. Let our doctors help you through the transition safely. Once you're stable, you can make an informed decision about your placement. She's already made her decision, Calder said. Vale's smile finally cracked just slightly. Has she? Or did 3 powerful alphas make it for her? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Maribel's chest tightened. Because wasn't that true? She hadn't chosen to come here. She'd been claimed, brought to this lodge, told she couldn't leave. Where was her choice in any of this? Maribel! Isambard's voice pulled her attention. He wasn't looking at Vale. He was looking at her, his expression open and devastatingly sincere. What do you want? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? No one had asked her that in years, maybe ever. She looked at Vale, at his polished authority and reasonable smile and the promise of safety wrapped in control. Then she looked at the brothers, at Calder, standing between her and danger, at Bram, tense and ready to fight, at Isambard, waiting for her answer without trying to influence it. Her body hummed with awareness of them, cedar and rain and something wild that called to parts of her she'd thought were dead. Dangerous, maybe. Unstable, possibly, but hers. I want to stay, she said quietly. Vale's expression hardened for just a moment before smoothing back into sympathy. Miss Crow, I don't think you understand what you're— I want to stay, she repeated, louder this time. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. I'm not going with you. Silence. Vale studied her, his gaze cold beneath the practiced warmth. Then he turned to Calder. This isn't over. Yes, Calder said evenly. It is. The council will want to verify her condition, medical examinations, documented proof that she's not being coerced. She just told you she's not. Under duress, perhaps. Bram laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You walked into our home uninvited and tried to take her. If anyone's under duress, it's us listening to you. Vale's jaw tightened. He looked at Maribel one last time, and she saw it, the calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't concerned about her safety. He was concerned about losing control of an asset. I'll be back, he said quietly, with proper documentation. Don't bother, Calder said. Vale smiled, cold, final. We'll see. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the lodge until the front door closed behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than his presence. Maribel's legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, her entire body shaking. Isambard knelt in front of her immediately, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. You okay? She shook her head. I don't know. You did the right thing, Calder said. Did I? Her voice cracked. What if he's right? What if I am unstable? What if— You're not. Bram's voice cut through her spiral. Vale doesn't care about your health. He cares about control, and you just took it away from him. Maribel's breath shuddered. He'll come back. Let him, Calder said. We'll be ready. She looked up at him, at all three of them, and felt something shift in her chest. Not breaking, opening. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why risk everything for me? Isambard's hand finally closed over hers, warm, steady, grounding. Because you're worth it. The words settled into her bones, fragile and terrifying, and impossibly real. Maribel squeezed his hand back, holding on like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. And maybe it was. Isambard's hand was warm against hers, solid and real, but Maribel's mind was already spinning ahead to what came next. Vale would come back. He'd said it like a promise. And men like him didn't make empty threats. Her fingers tightened around Isambard's, and he squeezed back gently, as if he could feel the spiral starting inside her. She forced herself to breathe. Once, twice, the air felt thick, like the lodge had shrunk around them. We need a plan, Bram said, breaking the silence. He'd moved to the window, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. Vale doesn't travel alone. If he came here, he brought others. He's testing us, Calder said, seeing how far we'll go. And now he knows. Bram turned from the window, his expression grim. He'll escalate. Maribel's stomach twisted. This is my fault. No. Isambard's voice was firm. He shifted closer, still kneeling in front of her. This is theirs. The council's, Vale's, not yours. But if you hadn't what? Bram cut in, his tone sharp. Existed? Survived? Refused to disappear when they wanted you to? Maribel flinched at the words, but they landed true. They were always going to come, Calder said quietly. You being here just gave them an excuse. An excuse for what? The brothers exchanged another look. That wordless conversation Maribel was starting to recognize. Whatever they were about to say, they'd already discussed it. Calder moved closer, his posture careful. The council's been looking for a reason to move against us for years. We're too independent, too powerful. A tri-alpha bond makes them nervous. Terrified, Bram corrected. Why? Maribel asked. Because we don't need them, Isambard said simply. We don't follow their hierarchies. We don't submit to their regulations, and we control land and resources they want access to. Maribel's breath caught. The railways. Calder nodded. We built the western lines without council funding, without their permission. That makes us a problem they can't regulate or remove easily. So they're using me to get to you, Maribel whispered. They're trying, Bram said. It won't work. But his voice carried an edge of doubt that made Maribel's chest tighten. She pulled her hand from Isambard's and stood, needing space, needing air, needing something other than the suffocating weight of being the reason everything was falling apart. You should let me go, she said. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. No, Calder said immediately. You don't understand. Maribel turned to face them, her voice shaking. I'm not worth this. I'm not worth you losing everything you've built. If I go back, if I let them take me, they'll break you, Bram finished coldly. That's what they do. They'll put you back on suppressants, lock you in some council facility, and erase every part of you that doesn't fit their design. Maribel's throat burned. Maybe that's better than dragging you down with me? It's not, Isambard said quietly. He stood, his movements slow and deliberate. And it's not your choice to make alone. Why not? Her voice cracked. It's my life, my body. Why don't I get to decide? You do, Calder said. But deciding to sacrifice yourself to save us isn't a decision, it's surrender. The word hit her like a blow. I've been surrendering my whole life, she said, tears burning behind her eyes. Maybe that's all I know how to do. Isambard stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. Then let us teach you something different. Maribel shook her head, backing away. You can't. You don't know what they'll do, what they're capable of. Yes, Bram said, his voice hard. We do. We fought them before. We'll fight them again. And what happens when you lose? Maribel's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. What happens when the council takes your land, your railways, everything you've built? What happens when they destroy you because I was too weak to— Stop! Calder's command cut through her spiral. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his presence overwhelming but not threatening. You're not weak, and this isn't your fault. Then whose fault is it? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Because it feels like mine. It feels like I ruin everything I touch. You don't, Isambard said softly. The world tried to ruin you, and you survived anyway. That's not weakness. It doesn't feel like strength, Maribel whispered. It is, Calder said, and we're not letting you go. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because what if they were wrong? What if she really was the problem, the weakness, the reason everything would fall apart? I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking completely. I can't be the reason you lose everything. You're not— A sound cut through the lodge, sharp, sudden, breaking glass. Maribel's breath stopped. The brothers reacted instantly, moving into formation like they'd practiced this 1,000 times. Calder moved to the window, Bram to the door. Isambard positioned himself in front of Maribel. Another crash, then another, windows shattering in quick succession. They're surrounding us, Bram said, his voice cold and controlled. How many? Calder asked. At least 6, maybe more. Maribel's pulse roared in her ears. Veil. He didn't waste time, Isambard muttered. Calder's expression hardened. Get her upstairs now. I'm not leaving you, Maribel said, her voice shaking. You're not, Isambard said, taking her arm gently but firmly. You're staying safe while we handle this. They're here because of me? They're here because they're cowards, Bram snapped, and they picked the wrong fight. Another window shattered, voices shouted outside, commands, threats, the sound of boots crunching through snow. Maribel's entire body trembled. This was happening. This was real. And it was her fault. Isambard pulled her toward the stairs, but she resisted, her gaze locked on Calder and Bram. Don't. We'll be fine, Calder said, though his eyes told a different story. Go. The front door splintered. Wood cracked. Hinges screamed. And then men poured. Into the lodge. 6, 7. Too many to count in the chaos. Council soldiers, their uniforms dark against the firelight, weapons drawn. Maribel's scream caught in her throat. Isambard shoved her toward the stairs. Go. Now. But she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but watch as Calder and Bram shifted, their bodies moving with terrifying precision, and the room exploded into violence. A soldier lunged at Calder. He sidestepped, caught the man's arm, and twisted. Bones snapped. The soldier screamed. Bram moved like water, fluid, deadly, unstoppable. 2 men went down before Maribel could process what she was seeing, but there were too many bodies, too many weapons, too much chaos. And then one of them broke through. A soldier, Young, desperate, eyes wild, charged straight for the stairs, straight for her. Isambard met him halfway, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The soldier staggered but didn't fall. He swung wildly, and Isambard blocked, then struck again, driving him back. Maribel's body finally moved. She stumbled up the stairs, her hands shaking, her vision blurring with tears and terror. Behind her, the sounds of fighting echoed through the lodge, grunts, crashes, shouted commands. She reached the top of the stairs and looked back. Calder had 3 men pinned. Bram was bleeding from a cut above his eye but still standing. Isambard was blocking the stairs, refusing to let anyone through. And then Maribel saw him, Vale, standing in the doorway, untouched, watching the chaos with cold calculation. His eyes found hers across the room, and he smiled. "Enough," he called out, his voice cutting through the violence like a blade. The fighting stopped. The soldiers stepped back, breathing hard, weapons still raised. Vale walked into the lodge slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. Calder straightened, blood on his knuckles. "Get out." "I will," Vale said pleasantly. "With Miss Crow." "No," Maribel whispered. Vale's gaze never left hers. "You have a choice, Miss Crow. Come with me now, and your protectors live. Refuse, and I'll have no choice but to classify this as an unlawful detainment, and you know what happens to alphas who kidnap registered omegas." Maribel's breath shattered. "Don't," Calder said, his voice rough. "Don't do this." But Vale was already climbing the stairs, and Maribel knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she was out of choices. Vale's footsteps echoed on the stairs, each one deliberate, unhurried. Maribel's back pressed against the hallway wall, her fingers digging into the rough timber. Her mind screamed at her to move, to run, to do something other than stand there frozen while he climbed toward her, but her body wouldn't obey. Below, Calder took a step forward. A soldier's weapon clicked, hammer pulling back, metal scraping metal. He stopped. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Vale said, his tone reasonable, almost kind. He reached the top of the stairs and stood there, just feet away from Maribel, his expression patient. "You're not a prisoner, Miss Crow. You're a protected asset. There's a difference." "No, there isn't," Maribel whispered. Vale's smile softened, like he was speaking to a frightened child. "I understand you're confused. The reactivation process can cause emotional instability, but once we get you back on a regulated treatment plan, I don't want treatment." "Of course you don't." His voice remained calm, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "That's the hormones talking. In a few weeks, once you're stabilized, you'll understand this was the right choice." Maribel's hands trembled. "You're going to drug me again." "We're going to help you," Vale corrected gently. "Just like we did before. Before, when they'd taken a 12-year-old girl and convinced her she was broken. When they'd pumped her full of chemicals that dulled everything, her scent, her instincts, her sense of self, until she became small enough, quiet enough, manageable enough to be useful. That wasn't help. That was erasure." "No," Maribel said. Vale's patience cracked, just slightly. "Miss Crow, I said no." The words came out stronger this time, and something shifted in the air. The scent she'd been feeling since arriving at the lodge, cedar and rain and wildness, suddenly flared brighter, sharper, wrapping around her like armor. Vale's nostrils flared, his eyes narrowed. "You're bonding with them." Maribel's breath caught. She didn't know what that meant, didn't know if it was true, but the way he said it, like an accusation, like proof of something dangerous, made her pulse race. "That's not possible," Vale continued, his voice hardening. "Not with your suppression history, unless—" He stepped closer, his gaze turning clinical. "Unless the bond's already forming, which means we're out of time." "Stay away from her." Isambard's voice cut through from the base of the stairs, raw and dangerous. Vale didn't turn. "This is council business, Rookridge. Interfere and you'll be arrested for obstruction." "Try it," Bram said coldly. Vale sighed, the sound heavy with manufactured regret. He raised his hand, and the soldiers below shifted, weapons lifting toward the brothers. "Last chance," Vale said, his attention still fixed on Maribel. "Come willingly, or I give the order. And believe me, Miss Crow, if you make me do this the hard way, these men won't walk away. Unlawful detainment of a registered Omega is a capital offense." Maribel's vision blurred. Capital offense. They'd kill them. They'd kill all three of them, and it would be legal, justified, written into reports that no one would question. Because she wasn't worth more than that. Because she'd never been worth more than that. "Maribel." Calder's voice reached her through the chaos, steady and certain. "Don't." But what choice did she have? If she stayed, they died. If she left, she died. Maybe not physically, but everything that made her her would disappear under the weight of suppressants and regulations and men like Vale who turned people into assets. There was no winning. There never had been. Maribel's gaze dropped to her hands, shaking, scarred from years of work no one valued, marked by a life spent being told she wasn't enough. And then she felt it. A flutter. Deep in her chest, so faint she almost missed it. Like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Or maybe it was hers, but different, stronger, layered with something she didn't understand. Cedar, rain, wildness, them. The bond Vale had mentioned. She could feel it now, fragile and new and terrifying. A connection forming between her and the brothers, something that pulled at her instincts and whispered that she wasn't alone. That she'd never been alone. Not really. Maribel lifted her head and met Vale's eyes. "I'm not going with you," she said quietly. Vale's expression darkened. "Then you're condemning them." "No." Maribel stepped forward, her legs still shaking but her voice steady. "You are. You're the one threatening them. You're the one who brought soldiers into their home. Don't put that on me." "Miss Crow?" "My name is Maribel." She took another step, and Vale actually backed up. Just one step, but it was enough. "And I'm not your asset. I'm not your problem. I'm not yours." The words echoed through the lodge, louder than she'd intended. Vale's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're doing." "Maybe not." Maribel's hands were still trembling, but she clenched them into fists. "But I know I'm not going back. I know I'm not letting you break me again." "Again?" Vale's tone turned mocking. "We saved you. Without council intervention, you'd have been discarded at birth. Your deficiency wasn't real," Maribel interrupted. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "You made me think I was broken so I'd be grateful, so I'd accept whatever you did to me. But I'm not broken. I never was." Silence. Vale stared at her, his mask of sympathy finally slipping. What remained underneath was cold calculation and barely restrained anger. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Maybe." Maribel lifted her chin. "But it's mine to make." Vale's hand dropped to his side. For a moment, Maribel thought he'd actually leave, that he'd accept her refusal and walk away. Then his fingers twitched, and she saw the signal. The soldiers moved. Isambard lunged up the stairs, but one of the soldiers was faster. The stock of a rifle swung toward his head. He ducked, twisted, but there were too many bodies, too much chaos. Calder roared, a sound that wasn't entirely human, and the room erupted. Maribel stumbled back, her shoulder hitting the wall. Someone grabbed her arm, Vale, his grip bruising. "You had a choice," he hissed. "You made it." Maribel's scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "Stop!" And the world listened. The sound that ripped from her wasn't just voice. It was command, power, something ancient and undeniable that crashed through the lodge like a shockwave. Everyone froze. The soldiers. The brothers. Vale himself, his hand still locked around Maribel's arm, his eyes wide with shock. Maribel's chest heaved. She didn't know what she'd done, didn't understand the power thrumming through her veins, hot and wild and impossible. But she felt it. And so did they. Vale's grip loosened. He stared at her like she'd become something other than human. You're... let... go." Maribel's voice was steady now, thrumming with authority she didn't recognize. Vale's hand dropped. The soldiers backed away, their weapons lowering despite themselves, instinct overriding orders. And Maribel stood there at the top of the stairs, trembling but unbroken, feeling the bond with the brothers flare bright and certain around her. Not an asset, not property, something else entirely, something they should have feared all along. Vale recovered first, his expression hardening into fury. "You're coming with me. Now." "No," Maribel said simply. And this time, when she said it, the lodge itself seemed to agree. Timber groaning, the fire flaring higher, the very air shifting in her defense. Vale stepped back, his face pale. "This isn't over." "Yes," Calder said from below, blood on his face but his voice steady. "It is." Vale looked between them. Maribel at the top of the stairs, the brothers surrounding her like a wall, and his own soldiers hesitating, unsure. He'd lost, and he knew it. "The council will hear about this," he said coldly. "Good," Bram replied. "Let them." Vale turned and walked out, his soldiers following in confused silence. The door slammed shut behind them, and Maribel collapsed. Her knees hit the floor before she felt herself falling. The world tilted, sound muffling like she'd been submerged underwater. Maribel's hands pressed against the wooden planks, fingers splaying wide, trying to anchor herself to something solid while everything inside her spun out of control. The power that had surged through her moments ago, that impossible, terrifying command, was gone. And in its absence, she felt hollow, scraped out, like she'd given away something vital and didn't know how to get it back. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. "Maribel!" Isambard's voice reached her first, urgent but careful. His hands hovered near her shoulders, not touching yet. "Can you hear me?" She nodded, though even that small movement made her head swim. "What happened?" Bram's voice came from somewhere to her left, closer than she expected. "What was that?" "An Omega command." Calder's tone was quieter, almost awed. "I've never seen one that strong." Maribel's breath came in shallow gasps. I didn't mean..." "You saved us," Isambard said gently. His hand finally settled on her shoulder, warm and grounding. "That's what you did." Her vision cleared slowly, shapes resolving into focus. The brothers surrounded. Her, Isambard kneeling beside her, Bram standing close, Calder a step behind, all of them watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Not fear, not pity, something else, something that made her chest ache. "I can't do that again," Maribel whispered. "I don't even know how I did it the first time." "You won't have to," Calder said. "Vale won't come back. Not after that." Maribel shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "He'll tell the council. He'll bring more soldiers. He'll do nothing." Bram's voice was hard, certain. "Because if he reports what happened here, he'll have to admit an Omega overpowered him, that he lost control. Men like Vale don't survive that kind of humiliation. But, Maribel..." Isambard shifted closer, his gaze steady and impossibly gentle. "You're safe. We're safe. It's over. Over." The word should have brought relief. Instead, it made something inside her crack wide open. Because it wasn't over. Not really. Vale might not come back, but the council would keep existing. The system that had broken her would keep breaking others. And she was still the same person who'd stood on that platform, letting alphas measure her worth in glances and dismissals. The same person who'd believed every lie they'd told her about being broken. "I don't feel safe," she whispered. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "Then let us catch you," Isambard said simply. Maribel's breath hitched. She looked at him, at all three of them, and felt the bond thrumming between them, fragile and new and terrifying in its intensity. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be this." "Be what?" Calder asked. "Whatever I just was." Her voice cracked. "Strong, powerful. Someone worth protecting. I don't know how to be her." "You already are her," Bram said. Maribel shook her head. No, that wasn't me. That was you, Isambard interrupted gently. That was always you. You just couldn't see it before. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe all of them. But belief required trust. And trust required letting go of every defense she'd built to survive. And she didn't know if she was strong enough for that. Calder moved closer, crouching in front of her so they were eye level. You asked us why we're doing this. Why we're risking everything for you. Maribel nodded, unable to speak. Because when we saw you at that station, we didn't see what they told you to see. We saw someone who'd survived 16 years of being told she was worthless and still had the courage to keep breathing. His voice softened. That's not weakness, Maribel. That's the strongest thing we've ever witnessed. Her chest heaved with a sob she couldn't contain. I don't feel strong. You don't have to, Isambard said. Not right now. Just let yourself feel safe. Safe. The word wrapped around her like warmth, like cedar and rain and something wild that called to the parts of herself she'd thought were dead. Maribel's hands unclenched slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached out. Isambard caught one hand, Calder took the other, and Bram stepped closer, his presence solid and steady behind her. The bond flared between them, not overwhelming this time, but present, real, a connection that pulsed with promise and possibility, and the terrifying certainty that she wasn't alone anymore. I'm scared, she whispered. So are we, Calder admitted. Maribel looked up at him, startled. You are? Of course. His mouth curved slightly, almost a smile. We just claimed an Omega who can command rooms with her voice. That's terrifying. Despite everything, Maribel laughed, a broken, watery sound that hurt and healed at the same time. We're also scared of losing you, Isambard added quietly. Of not being enough. Of failing to protect you when it matters. You didn't fail, Maribel said. You're here. You stayed. So did you, Bram said. Even when leaving would have been easier. Maribel's throat tightened. Because he was right. She could have gone with Vale, could have surrendered, let them drug her back into compliance, let herself disappear into whatever the council wanted her to be, but she'd chosen this instead, chosen them, chosen herself. What happens now? She asked. Calder's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Now we finish what we started. Which is building something better. His gaze held hers, steady and unshakable. A life where you're not defined by what they told you, where you get to decide who you are. Maribel's breath caught. I don't know who that is yet. That's okay, Isambard said. You have time to figure it out. Time. The word felt foreign, precious, like something she'd never been allowed to have before. Will you stay? Calder asked quietly. Not because you have to, not because you're out of options, but because you want to. Maribel looked at each of them, at Calder's steady strength, at Bram's fierce protection, at Isambard's gentle certainty, at the bond thrumming between them, fragile but growing stronger with every breath. Yes, she whispered, I want to stay. The word settled into the space between them, simple and irrevocable. Calder nodded once, Bram's shoulders relaxed, and Isambard smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. Then welcome home, Isambard said softly. Home. Maribel had spent her entire life searching for that word, chasing it through registry offices and train stations and lonely rooms where no one knew her name. And now, kneeling on the floor of a timber lodge in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by 3 alphas who'd chosen her when no one else would, she finally understood what it meant. Not a place, a feeling, a choice. Hers. The fire crackled in the hearth below. Snow whispered against the windows, and Maribel sat there, hands held by the brothers, feeling the bond wrap around her like the coat Calder had given her at the station, warm, protective, and impossibly real. She didn't know what the future held, Didn't know if the council would try again, or if Vale would find another way to hurt them, or if she'd ever truly believe she was worthy of this. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't broken. She never had been. And anyone who tried to tell her otherwise would have to face not just her, but the 3 alphas who'd seen her worth when the rest of the world was blind. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Calder asked. "For seeing me." His hand squeezed hers gently. "Thank you for letting us." And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and cedar and the promise of something new, Maribel Crow finally stopped running and started living. The end. They said she was too broken to love, too damaged to claim, too worthless to fight for. They were wrong.